Welcome to the Delineation, an astrology show with Cam White.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Delineation. I believe this is now episode 9. Sorry for my absence. I needed to take a little bit of a break, but anyway, I'm really excited to be back here making another episode for you guys. For a second there, I was kind of going into like some really deep topics, especially like that last episode. But this episode, it's not going to be light at all now that I think of it. But this episode today, I really want to go over all of my predictions for the Venus retrograde in Capricorn. Now, if you're on my channel and you're on my YouTube, then you've probably seen my Venus retrograde video that I posted. Pretty much in that video, all I really try to do is just make sure what I really just try to get across is like, what is a retrograde? How exactly does this Venus retrograde look, and how is it going to mostly affect the signs on on a personal level, right? And I really just did that video just so you guys would know how it's going to mostly be affecting you. So you know what a Venus retrograde means, and you know what it looks like, so it's a little bit more comprehensible. But in today's episode of the Delineation, I really just want to kind of throw out some predictions. Not necessarily I don't want this to be an episode of like, oh, how are we going to deal with the Venus retrograde in our lives? But mostly this is kind of like more of a mundane thing. However, one of the ways that I really want to preface this video, and I think this is something that I'm going to continue to do, is this is a prediction video. You are watching an astrologer, or perhaps listening, but you are listening to someone who uses the stars to make predictions about the current circumstances of the world, right? I want to start, being able to make more videos about certain predictions that I have over world events without it being super serious. I want this to be really casual. I want this to be like, hey, some things I might get right, but I'm more than open with things kind of being wrong. I think this is, in astrology, we're really focused on prediction, right? However, I don't always feel like I always have the opportunity to really tell my predictions and say what exactly I think. I don't necessarily always feel like I have a platform where I could say that in a casual space, because also, unfortunately, as someone who runs, a YouTube channel and that has a voice, a lot of people can take what you say extremely seriously. And that's why I'm prefacing this video like this today, because we're going to talk about some subjects that are a little bit intense for some people. But what I don't want this to be is oh my God, Cameron, you're just, scare tacting and, you fear mongering and all of this stuff. It's like, well, like my job is to predict the future, and it's not like, everything's sunshine and rainbows right now. But essentially what I want to do in this episode is kind of go over some of my predictions of what this Venus retrograde is going to hold, especially for us here in America. I want to be able to say these predictions without everyone freaking out like it's going to be the end of the world. Because unfortunately, as an astrologer, you don't necessarily always know how much weight your words really have. Like, I'll be in the middle of a consultation and I'll go through and I'll say everything I want to say. And, someone may not necessarily listen to any of that, but then I might make one side comment that I don't necessarily mean, but I just kind of say it off the top of my head. And then someone might hold on to that more than anything else that I said. And so they put more emphasis into that one thing I said rather than everything else that I said. And so, I don't want this to be one of those things where, I'm just trying to like, I don't want people to be like, oh, this isn't like I'm making these predictions and it's going to happen exactly this way. I want to make some predictions, and I want you to also let me know what your predictions are, what you think is going to happen. If you're watching this on YouTube, please let me know in the comments some of what your predictions are or your opinions about my predictions. I want this to be more fun. I think in astrology, no one predicts stuff anymore. Like no one's like I think it would be fun to be able to be more open about predictions. And hey, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I would like to see why I was wrong, or maybe, because what's interesting with astrology predictions is a lot of the times it's stuff that is like predictable, but it's always hard to always know exactly where it comes from, right? Like, for example, when Saturn squared Uranus earlier this year, and it's like, well, there's going to be a hiccup in the supply chain thing. And that was already kind of going on. So it was kind of maybe hard to see where it would manifest. And then lo and behold, it manifests itself as the Suez Canal getting blocked by a ship being sideways. Like you don't really always know where it's going to come from. And, if someone predicted that would be pretty insane, but I at least want to ballpark some of my thoughts about this stuff. So anyway, just wanted to preface this episode with, we're going to be making some predictions. Please hold on to this very, very loosely. I could be right. I could be wrong. I also want to know, though, your guys' thoughts and opinions too, because there's going to be, well, what's fun about astrology is a practice that you can apply to literally anything in life, right? You could apply art, you could apply astrology to art, you could apply astrology to, technology, you could apply astrology to all of these different things, right? And it's just a matter of how we compare the two. And today I'm going to be talking about, or I should say, I'm going to be covering some topics that I may not necessarily be super informed about, whereas some of my listeners, some of you guys might be more informed about, or you maybe I think I'm more informed than I am, and you guys think I'm not, and you want to say something. Why I'm kind of bringing this up is astrology just covers so many different aspects, right? Like I'm making predictions, like in this video, we're going to be kind of making predictions about so many different things, right? And I know astrology. I don't always know every little situation, right? But I got to be able to attach astrological signification with, current events. So like I said, I would really, really like to know your guys' opinions on this. I would like to know what maybe some predictions you might have. So I guess let's go ahead and start. I have quite a big list of topics that I want to go over and discuss. Some of you who are on my Patreon and have been on there for a while, you've seen that I did a video on my Patreon that's exclusive to my patrons of what has happened the last 2 times Venus went retrograde in this part of the sky. So for those who aren't familiar, Venus is going retrograde this winter. I did a whole video about it where I go into every detail so excruciatingly vividly. It almost hurts. If you haven't watched my Venus retrograded video, check that out if you want to know the specifics. But for those listening, Venus is stationing retrograde at 26 degrees Capricorn this winter. It will be stationing retrograde right on top of Pluto. It will be retrograde from December 19th all the way to I think January 30th. Then it will station direct, and then it will be conjoining Mars as it goes through shadow and leaves shadow. And then there will be a Venus-Mars-Pluto conjunction as Venus leaves shadow. Quite the ordeal here. And in my video on my Patreon, I kind of went over what has happened the last 2 times Venus has went retrograde. Where in that video too, I kind of go over much more of I kind of bring up news articles and all the more specifics. And so in this video, I kind of want to bring back a little bit what I said in that one on my Patreon for those who haven't heard. And there's one thing I really want to talk about first and foremost before I start talking about some of the other predictions that maybe some people are looking forward to. But one of them is the Iran nuclear deal. So what's interesting, well, this is the thing with astrology. Astrology is a practice of us literally looking at cycles. We're looking at repetition. We're looking at patterns emerging, right? Even though skeptics and critics might say that astrology is not a science, it's actually, in fact, extremely scientific when it's really just looking at when do patterns evolve, why did they evolve, where did they come from, how do we describe them, things like that. So what's nice about astrology is we have these planets that make these orbits that complete these quote unquote cycles that can repeat themes as they kind of, repeat their cycles. And Venus retrogrades are one of those easy ones. Venus retrogrades, in case you guys aren't aware, Venus retrogrades every 1.5 years. So it's not the most common retrograde like a Mercury retrograde, since Mercury retrogrades, I think 4 times a year. She only retrogrades once every 1.5 years, but Venus does retrograde in the exact same part of the sky every 8 years. So why, for example, we're doing this Venus retrograde video making predictions, and why I bring up the Iran nuclear deal is Venus is stationing at 26 degrees Capricorn. Here, let me actually pull up the chart for those that are watching this on YouTube. Venus is stationing retrograde at 26 degrees Capricorn. Well, 8 years ago in 2014, Venus had stationed retrograde at 28 degrees Capricorn. That was December of 2013. Venus stationed retrograde at 28 degrees Capricorn. Let me rewind it a couple of years here to 2013. There she is. Venus is at 28 degrees, and then boom, she stations retrograde. So every 8 years, Venus stations retrograde in the same sign, except she moves backwards 2 degrees. So for example, Venus is stationing retrograde at 26 degrees Capricorn this December. Last time, 8 years ago, she stationed retrograde at 28 degrees Capricorn, which you know what that means. Well, technically it was 2858 because, well, and I'm bringing that up because 8 years before that, in 2005, Venus stationed retrograde at like 1 degree Aquarius. So pretty much 2 degrees off. 3 degrees, depending if you do the minutes and stuff like that. But anyway, Venus will retrograde in the same part of the sky every 8 years, just minus 2 degrees. So Venus retrogrades are a really easy tool to really look at cycles and themes that repeat. And one of the ones, and this is why I'm kind of bringing this up first thing when it comes to this Venus retrograde cycle, is the Iran nuclear deal. So in case you guys aren't aware, the Iran nuclear deal first came about that December of 2005 and January of 2006. From everything that I've read, it kind of came about in the sense of like, oh, Iran's working on, nuclear arms. What are we going to do? There was this kind of big falling out. But then in 2014, in December of 2013 and 2014, mind you, what made that Venus retrograde so specific? So, well, let me back up here. Let me just say this real quick. 2005, 2006, right? Venus retrograde in the same part of the sky. She stationed retrograde at 1 degree Aquarius. And that was also before Pluto had entered Capricorn. So Pluto wasn't in Capricorn. Pluto wasn't involved. Venus stationed in Aquarius, right? Versus in 2014 was the first year Venus actually stationed in Capricorn, and she stationed direct on top of Pluto. So the last Venus retrograde was mostly related to Pluto themes and the Capricorn themes, right? Not so much the one in 2005, 2006, which we'll get back to. But anyway, I'm bringing that up because the last time Venus retrograded in Capricorn, Venus stationed at 28 degrees and then she pretty much stationed direct right on top of Pluto. Let me actually get back to it here. Yeah. Venus stationed direct pretty much on top of Pluto, not exactly. But in 2014, this was when the Iran nuclear deal really came about. It was kind of like a last minute thing. And it was more towards the beginning of 2014 where everyone was kind of in consensus of like, yeah, we're going to get into the Iran nuclear deal and everything's going to work out fine. Now, you were probably thinking already, yeah, Cameron, Iran nuclear deal, that's fine. But we're not in the Iran nuclear deal anymore. And I think, that's correct. So what I really see, like, for example, when we start talking about repetitive themes, Venus stationed, retrograde in Aquarius. And I think that was when Iran's nuclear programs first got brought up in 2005, 2006. And the Iran nuclear deal didn't happen until 2014. And now in 2014, Venus stationed direct on top of Pluto. So remember what I talked about in that Venus retrograde video of like, Venus is like peace and working out negotiations in Capricorn on top of Pluto. This is again like working out a deal with, and especially Venus stationing direct on top of Pluto, working out a deal with nuclear power. In case you guys aren't familiar too, Pluto really, I literally seen it in clients' charts that work with plutonium or that work with nuclear energy in some fashion, have Pluto either angular, like on their midheaven or something like that. But Pluto and plutonium definitely going to have a little bit of a signification there. So Pluto ruling things like, nuclear energy. Is it all that far? Pretty much fits the bill, right? Venus stationed direct on Pluto last time. So that kind of makes sense. Like, okay, things working out, things kind of agreeing on the nuclear front. This time though, Venus is stationing retrograde on Pluto. And so Venus stationing retrograde, remember what I talked about in that video? It's kind of like, oh, there's some kind of rules changing here, or maybe a disagreement. Now, what's interesting is that we're not in the like, if you would have asked me like 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember when we got out of the Iran nuclear deal, but this would be like, oh, we're going to get out of the Iran nuclear deal at this point. So because we're already out of it, it can't be that, right? What I really think it's going to be is I wouldn't be surprised if like there was some type of nuclear enrichment program that we found out about that everyone started freaking out about. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be some type of, I got to be careful with how I say things here, but like a kind of like a false flag thing. If like, well, so for example, another reason I say this is, do you guys remember before COVID? So for all the, I don't want to say OG astrologers, but for all the people who have been doing astrology for a while, Do you remember before COVID hit and it was December of 2019? Everyone was like, oh my God, what's the Saturn Pluto conjunction going to be? What's the Saturn Pluto conjunction going to be? Is it going to be the end of the world? What is it going to be? Now, what was really funny was at that point, we thought it was going to be World War III, which that's because, so the same eclipse, the Christmas eclipse that happened in 2019, December of 2019. Actually, in fact, let me actually pull up the chart for those who aren't familiar. If you got into astrology during the pandemic, you didn't really miss a lot, but boy, let's just look at this Christmas eclipse here. If for those that are just listening, it was an eclipse, right? On the south node, and it had the sun and the moon, of course, in Capricorn, Jupiter in Capricorn, while Saturn and Pluto were on top of each other in Capricorn. This happened on Christmas. Now, I remember, I think Chris Brennan brought this up in his podcast about like this was the first publication of the COVID news. I think this is like the first article, on that Christmas day on that eclipse. That was the first article that published, hey, like new illness or new sickness found in Wuhan, China, or whatever. But that was, of course, before we knew that the pandemic was going to hit. Back when life was still kind of okay. But do you guys remember what happened here? This was like, I just remember being on Twitter on this day and just I don't know. It's a very interesting time to be alive. But this was when Trump like randomly killed that Iranian military leader, like out of the blue, like super duper randomly. The only reason I'm bringing this up is, and that was when people thought like World War III was going to start and all this other stuff. The only reason I'm bringing that up is clearly when we have this part of the sky activated, we have a little bit of, there's something going on with Iran, right? And this was also too, what was interesting was this eclipse actually went over Iran too. And there was like a really famous picture of this eclipse that was from, I think, shot at the not at the Suez Canal. Maybe at not the Suez Canal. What's that thing that Iran has that's across from Saudi Arabia? The Strait of Hormuz. There was a picture taken there of this eclipse like right at sunrise, and it looked really, really cool. But the eclipse path actually went over Iran. And then also, I don't know if you guys remember too, when the beginning of COVID hit, it totally hit Iran really hard. So there's just kind of, again, maybe it was just the eclipse that really kind of brought Iran into the picture here. But I do find it kind of interesting that the last two times Venus retrograde in this part of the sky, there was this nuclear agreement talk, and then at this point, this is when we killed one of their leaders. And so I'm looking at this Venus retrograde as like, I wouldn't be surprised if something came out of and this is why I'm kind of talking about this first, is I don't really see anything in the news yet about this, which most of the predictions I'm going to talk about today are pretty much things that you could see coming. And it's mostly when is it going to come, is that's going to be mostly my prediction. But there's a lot of things that it's like, okay, like it doesn't take an astrologer to predict this. But I haven't seen anything with Iran, and I would be really surprised if nothing came. I would be mind boggled. I would be really stressed out, actually, if nothing happened with the Iran nuclear deal or Iran nuclear talks during this Venus retrograde. I mean, like Venus is stationing on top of Pluto. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if like, again, this is when we find out like Iran's either like enriching nuclear, plutonium, or doing something along this lines. That makes, and because we live in the state that we do, this is going to be a big, oh my God, Iran's got a nuclear bomb, and everyone's going to freak out about it. It's going to be a sensational news piece to pretty much, because sensational news pieces is the only thing that's keeping old media alive. So I just wouldn't be surprised if around this time this came up, because this is also, you got to remember, this was like, it was on Christmas where Trump killed that one dude, where like even a big hesitation for me making a lot of calls with this Venus retrograde has been is that it's happening towards Christmas. So it's like what actually goes on during Christmas, like politically speaking, not a lot can go on because a lot of people will be on vacation. But this is one of those things that it's definitely going to hit, right at this time. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's something to do with Iran and either them going against the Iran nuclear deal, because I know we withdrew, but I'm not sure if they are still abiding by it or not. Like I said, it is very difficult to be very knowledgeable on every subject that I see a correlation with when it comes to the astrology. So I don't know enough about my geopolitical knowledge of Iran and, or I should say America's foreign policy towards Iran. But anyway, one of my predictions is that, because I also think Venus is stationing on top of Pluto, where there seems to be like a disagreement over how nuclear things are ran. And then Venus will station direct and then go along with Mars, right? Like I've talked about. And then there's this Mars Venus Pluto conjunction where I wouldn't be surprised if, like, again, more talks don't work, and Mars Venus and Pluto is like kind of continuing on with what they were doing anyway, regardless of what the rules do say. But I think anything that kind of starts off with Venus stationing, Venus stationing retrograde, by the time Venus leaves shadow is really when things will wrap up. It's really this, beginning of March, this March 2nd. Like when Venus and Mars can join Pluto, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, yeah, we're just going to do our thing anyway. Well, and now to move on to kind of like the second prediction, because this kind of does take us to the next one, is so now we're going to open a bigger box of cookies here that some people may not be aware of, but if you're listening, I want you to pretend that you're looking at these charts. But what chart I'm going to pull up here is the Sibley chart. So for those that aren't familiar, America has a birth chart, and what birth chart people use is very highly debated, just like everything else in this godforsaken practice. But pretty much most people agree that the Sibley chart is the birth chart of America. For those that don't know it but want to punch it in, July 4th, 1776, at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Sag rising, Aquarius moon, Cancer sun. And the big thing with America's Sibley chart is, if you notice, Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn. And you're probably thinking, wait a second, Cameron, Pluto sounds very close to that right now. And you're correct. Right now, Pluto, or I should say America, is about to go through what we call its Pluto return. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys, oh, this is what a Pluto return means, and this is what it means in astrology, and it's always mean this. We haven't even seen Pluto around for like 100 years yet. It's been classified as a planet. It was declassified as a planet. Now, you guys know me, that that I'm still going to use it, but how much, there's just been, the reason I struggle with this, there's been so many people I just hear throughout these random wild card like sayings of what America's Pluto return is going to be. They're like, oh, it's going to be like, a couple years ago, a lot of people were like, oh, it's going to be like the death of America. And it's just like, like maybe from like in 10 or 20 years, we can look back at that point, but like, it's not, Rome survived like 2 Pluto returns. So like, I just don't necessarily think this will be the end of, anything necessarily, but there is a lot to talk about. Let's talk about Pluto in America's chart. Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn, which, mind you, the reason why this is coming up in this video is the Venus retrograde is happening at 27 degrees Capricorn. So kind of important. Pluto rules, again, I kind of talked about this in the Venus retrograde video, power, fear. Now, if you want to talk about power and well, let's just, first things first, let me go over my bases here. If this is your first time ever looking at a birth chart, the second house where Pluto is at, where my little cursor is at, the second house rules money and finances and resources. Capricorn rules business. Capricorn rules systems, right? And Capricorn is in the second house of money in America's chart. And Pluto is there. Pluto rules corruption and Pluto rules power. Could you get any more on point? But it's not, I don't know. It's not really that crazy to say that a nation, one of the wealthiest nations, is corrupt with money. But I think it's a little bit different when you talk about America and its influence. Speaking, mostly because now, again, this is where I'm going to the deep end of the pool, a place that I should not be playing at because I don't know. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I do know enough to be dangerous here. And so what we're going to start talking now is about American economics. And the reason I'm laughing is there's going to be people listening to this that know more about this than I do. And there's also going to be people listening to this that have way less of a clue of what I'm talking about than I do. And so I'm going to try to communicate this in both for the people that are on one spectrum of me that has no idea what this is and the other spectrum of me that wants to know more. But anyway, Pluto is in America's second house. We can associate this with, like the world's reserve currency being backed by the US dollar. The US dollar really is kind of one of the most powerful, tools that, there is really in the world is this cash, especially specifically the US dollar. Now, we could go in all day long about when the Fed was created and when we got off the gold standard and all of that jazz. But let's just talk about Pluto in the second house, because if you've gotten a reading from me, you know how I've opened up my reading, and that is with the concept of the natal promise, right? There is a promise in the chart, and whatever transit you're talking about. For example, a Pluto transit. We want to know, well, what does a Pluto transit mean for America? Well, it means whatever its Pluto has. Now, a natal chart, birth chart, natal promise is way different than a natal promise for a country's chart, right? But you guys get the idea. What I want to bring up is think of what Pluto rules, right? Pluto rules fear, Pluto rules destruction, Pluto rules corruption, it rules power. And let's kind of do some backwards math, or let's kind of, retrace our steps here to kind of understand what this Pluto return might be. Pluto entered Capricorn the month, or I think it was like November of 2008, so October of 2008. It was literally like a few weeks right after the 2008 financial crash. Pluto went into Capricorn, and of course, as we've seen, then we've gotten into more and more debt. And then of course, the only major other Pluto transits was when Pluto went, I think it was the Venus retrograde in 2014, because that one was opposite Pluto. But the only thing I saw, well, we're going to get to that in a second. The only thing that happened then was interest rates rose, and I'm going to keep talking about that because that's one of my predictions is interest rates will again rise. But again, that's not the craziest prediction. But the reason I'm bringing it up is in 2014, for all my economic nerds out there, or I should say the end of 2013, you might recall a piece of news about the Fed and its taper tantrum. The Fed was pretty much at the time up in the air if they were going to start tapering, I think, their asset purchases. I might have said the wrong thing there, and it might sound really dumb, but I think that's what it was. Again, I don't know this stuff, so if you're listening to this and you don't know what's going on, it's okay. I don't think a lot of us do. But anyway, to explain this in a really dumb way, what was going on back then was the Fed was like, oh, we don't know if we're going to we're going to taper off some of our assets, which would pretty much, I don't know, it does something to the economy. But I remember back then, well, I don't say I remember back then, what I was reading in the articles was that they were concerned about whether or not they were going to start tapering, because then in January of 2014, this is something I do know, pretty much, real quick summary of economics and what's kind of going on in this country right now is the stock market's going crazy, house market's going crazy. It's all kind of on nothing at the moment. Everyone's kind of waiting for it to die down. But the only reason people are going super crazy with a lot of purchasing, for example, like housing right now, is because interest rates are so low. Interest rates are very low, so it makes borrowing money very cheap. The Fed pretty much controls the interest rates for the most part. And in 2014, and the big reason why people are afraid of the interest rates rising, because if interest rates rise, that means people are going to stop borrowing money, which makes the whole money machine and printing go burr. That stops, and everything starts to go down. So all you need to know is interest rates go up, money go down. Bad. That's all you got to really know. Anyway, we have very small interest rates right here in America, and if you look at the Fed sheet, which for those who don't know, the Fed sheet is pretty much a really boring piece of paper that truly, I mean, like, it's just people. This is all like just learning about. I've had to learn so much about economics to understand this Venus retrograde. And the more I learn about it, the more this is all pretend, the more none of this actually matters. But anyway, the Fed sheet is this thing where this pretty much goes over how much money the Fed has, what they're borrowing. But anyway, in the Fed sheet, the last time Venus retrograded in Capricorn, which was January in 2014, there was a very small interest rate rise for the first time in quite some time in 2014. And so that was really the only thing that I saw that happened in 2014 that was really economic, like money related, besides the fact that Janet Yellen got put on the Fed chair at that time, which I wouldn't be surprised if that came up again. But to go back to what I was saying, this being, Pluto entered. So Pluto entered Capricorn, right? 2008 financial collapse, and then I think in 2014 that Venus retrograde, that was there was a little bit of a rise of interest rates, and they weren't sure if the Fed was going to start tapering. But then we get to 2020, and right now what I'm going through is these major Pluto transits that have happened in Capricorn to kind of give us an idea of what this one's going to be. And Saturn conjoined Pluto in Capricorn. Do you guys remember what happened? The whole economy tanked and everyone lost their jobs and there was a pandemic, and it was mostly the economy tanking at first, and then the lockdowns really came into place afterwards. But that was when Saturn conjoined Pluto, and that did definitely start a period of a lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of destabilization. And so you can almost look back as the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, or really Pluto ingressing into Capricorn, but that Saturn-Pluto conjunction really being the beginning of this Pluto return. How is it going to look? Let's talk about it. Well, the Pluto return of America doesn't actually happen until 2022. It's not going to happen until, I believe, February, March of 2022. So that's really our time frame that we're going to look at here. But I think it's interesting that Venus will station retrograde and kind of usher in, so to say, this Pluto return. The big thing here that I really see is the stock market going crazy. And that's simply because, well, so again, like I said in this video, there's going to be a lot of predictions that I'm making that aren't all that crazy. Like, for example, I almost said this in my Venus retrograde video. Venus rules products and goods on a very, very simple level. Products and goods. Think of Venus in Capricorn being like, well, I like to think of, well, right now I'm recording this, I think right when Venus entered shadow. And you're seeing the supply line chains get all messed up. Products are not being on the shelves. And so I think, again, Venus stationing retrograde on Pluto, Pluto being about fear, there's this I just wouldn't be surprised if like most shelves are kind of empty by December 19th. Now, again, that's not a crazy prediction because, of course, that's something that we see happening right now as early as November 18th. But that's going to keep going for the next month. And I kind of just think Venus stationing on Pluto is like, there's going to be a whole lot of nothing. And again, I don't know, with there not being products, there not being these goods, and there being this delay, I wouldn't be surprised if that flew up inflation more. Pluto makes the small things big and makes the big things small, right? And value, and Venus rules value, right? And Venus retrograding is kind of like shifting the value, where I kind of look at this as like, I wouldn't be surprised, again, more and more inflation kind of goes a little bit crazier and crazier and crazier. Now, when we kind of talk about how this is all going to go down, it really depends on how you look at it. So let's kind of go day by day here. Venus will station on Pluto, where I think it might be more of the Iran nuclear deal thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some type of, not Christmas sell-off, but I think inflation worries will get crazy, but I don't necessarily think anything's going to happen until the new year. And this is why. So Venus will be retrograde, right? So it's going to be like no one's going to get anything for Christmas. But then we get to December 29th. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting, really, really fast. And that is because Venus, if for those that are listening, you should really watch this on YouTube, but Mercury is going to conjoin Venus and Pluto at 24 and 25 degrees Capricorn and simultaneously enter shadow. So let me say that again. Venus is retrograde on top of Pluto. They're like a degree separated. Venus is at 24 cap, Pluto's at 25 cap. Mercury on the 29th will both conjoin Venus and Pluto. And in between those two moments, will enter shadow. So as it enters shadow, it's conjoining Pluto, it's conjoining Venus. There's something about the 29th that is going to get kind of announced and really, really brought up. Now, also at this time, one of my predictions too, and again, this isn't necessarily a big prediction. This is all kind of stuff that we should see coming, and that's going to be an energy crisis. But it's going to play in two parts. Now, this is where I want to go back to. This is not a fear-mongering episode. Astrologers have been predicting terrible things since the beginning of the ages. So if you're listening to this and you're shaking in your boots, I'm going to need you to kind of suck it up and kind of say, hey, well, because like here's the thing. It may not even be that bad, and it may not even affect you. Like I made a comment about like, I think it was in like one of my weeklies or whatever about Saturn squaring Uranus and there being like an energy crisis. And someone's like, oh my God, like, how can you say that? And it's just like, yeah, sure, there could be an energy crisis, and like there's children starving every day in Africa, and there's little genocide going on in China, but like, that doesn't affect you, does it? Like, it's just one of those things where for here in America, I could see there being an energy crisis, but it may not even affect you. So like, this isn't going to be some broad sweeping thing. And, I'm not trying to perpetuate your fears, but hey, we're in the middle of an energy crunch right now. Gas prices are high. And the way that, economically speaking, it's looking, I can't imagine infrastructure is holding up all that well. And so what part of the country is it going to be? I don't know. I wish I could tell you, but I would say Saturn squaring Uranus here on December 14th. That's definitely going to be, this seems much more of an infrastructure problem. Now, this is why I'm bringing this up, because of course it's easy to say, oh, there's going to be an energy crisis probably in the beginning of December. But that's just, I'm only bringing up December simply because December, what is this, 13th? What day? Hold on. December 20th. Oh, my bad, the 23rd. I just got done talking about this. On the 23rd is when Saturn squares Uranus, and that's when, again, some type of infrastructure problem, probably an energy thing, or the problem is it might deal with supply lines simply because, for example, the last time Saturn squared Uranus was the whole Suez Canal thing. And then the time before that was the whole GameStop thing. And that totally shook up the stock market and the economy. I would just say the 23rd is definitely going to be like whoopsie, something kind of bad happening, but not only in the stock market, but more specifically related to infrastructure, if not energy. And it could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Climate related, but I think it's going to be energy. Now, what's interesting is that Saturn-Uranus square happens on the 23rd, right? But we're not done yet, because what's really important is Mercury will enter shadow and conjoin Pluto, which will be interesting. But then as we get into the beginning of the year, Mercury will enter Aquarius. Mercury will pretty much station retrograde on January 14th, exactly squaring Uranus too. This is where I think the energy crisis is going to really, really come in, because I think on about New Year's, the government's going to come out and say, everything's fine. Everything's under control. No worries at all. But I think Venus will be retrograding here. And I still think we're going to be dealing we'll be dealing with like inflation, but then I think the Fed will probably raise interest rates. The economy is probably going to suffer a pretty big bite at this point. Things will be kind of going downhill on an economic level, on like a stock market level. And that, the stock market doesn't always affect everybody either. It's prices are like here. Well, let me get to that. Mercury is going to station retrograde here, and it's going to station retrograde exactly squaring Uranus. This to me seems like the kicker, like worse, like 10 times worse than like the Suez Canal thing. Cause like when the Suez Canal got blocked, that was literally like, it totally threw everything in for a loop. This is like, let's say, here's an example. Like there's underwater cables that pretty much connect the world with internet. For example, this could be like, well, this is what happened, I believe, in Orange County. I might be wrong about this, but the oil spill that happened out in Orange County earlier in 2021 happened because someone dropped like an anchor on like the oil line or whatever, and like no one read the pressure gauges changing. That's very like, maybe not necessarily Mercury, but that idea of something that are so small and insignificant that really wasn't even a part of the picture, causing such a huge issue. January 4th, like Mercury stationing square Uranus. My only other issue is I think at this time, this is going to be a big electrical issue, a huge, huge electrical issue. The last time Mercury stationed retrograde there with the Saturn-Uranus square was also the Texas grid failure. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that. This to me looks a little worse though. Like, not to say that wasn't bad, but like Mercury enters shadow conjoining Pluto and stations retrograde squaring Uranus. I'm going to assume it's going to be a pretty big electrical thing. It could be infrastructure. It could be technology. But this seems really, really on more towards the technology part, not so much infrastructure. So it could be like electricity, right? That is a part of infrastructure. And I think this will really set the tailspin in for, well, because so here's the other thing. inflation's probably going to go up by Christmas and going into the new year. But at some point in the new year, they're going to raise interest rates. And then deflation's going to kick in. Now, one of two things are going to happen. And this is where I don't know, but all I know is that the astrology says it's going to be really crazy during this 3-month window. So I'm going to say that it's going to be crazy during this 3-month window. And that's because Venus will be retrograde by this point, right? Or I mean, she'll be almost stationing direct, but then Mercury stations retrograde. And I really think this Mercury retrograde really, I mean, just it's all the house of cards just kind of comes down. And what I wanted to get to is Mars entering Capricorn. So Mars will enter Capricorn, Mercury will go back into Capricorn, and then here at about the end of January, Venus will station direct. Mercury, when Venus stations direct, Mercury is also on top of Pluto, still retrograde, and Mercury is about to station direct as well too. Where this seems like we know the economic devastation that has occurred, like whether that, and so here's what can this look like? Well, mind you, this is what's really interesting. We haven't actually gotten to America's Pluto return yet. That's going to happen in March, and it's going to continue throughout 2022 through 2024, but we're still not there yet, even though all of this stuff has happened. And I think Venus stationing on Pluto, I think a lot of fear is going to drive a lot of people buying things. There's going to be more to that we kind of talk about, but Mercury kind of being on top of Pluto here is I think we'll see the bottom of it. But then what I want to get to is Mercury stationing direct at the beginning of February. Mars and Venus will be at this bottom, but then I want to go to March 2nd here, because this is when Venus leaves shadow by conjoining Pluto and Mars. Now, another thing that's going to come up here, this is something that I also don't know anything about, and the more I learn about it, the more I don't understand it, and that's central bank digital currencies. I would love to know what your opinion is on those, if you're familiar with those at all. But here's the thing. Pluto is in America's second house of money. We're in a ton of debt. We're not on the gold standard. I doubt I had a lot of fears that the US dollar would collapse, but I only had those fears because China was doing really good at the time. But now China in the CCP's chart really looks bad too. So I can't imagine the yen doing better than, was it the yen or is it I forgot what their currency is called. I thought that currency would probably do better, and maybe, the world goes onto that, but I just don't think China is going to be doing all that well either during this time. So I don't think that we're changing, currencies. What I really think this Pluto return is going to be is I doubt we're going to default on our debt, right? Defaulting on our debt, we're already using pretend money. Fiat money isn't even real. The debt that we're in isn't even real. None of this is even real. So I just find it mind-boggling that we would default on our debt when we could just make something else up to keep the gravy train growing, which is also more than likely what is going to happen. A lot of people said that we're going to default on our debt. I don't necessarily believe that. What I could see this though is some type of either again deflationary death spiral, which would be the currency's value would go down and down. So things would technically get cheaper and cheaper, which would be good. But again, I don't know economics enough to really even explain this in a dumb way. But I really see Venus and Mars, right? Remember how we talked about Mars being about fights and conflicts and working? And it's in Capricorn where it's really exalted and it's on top of Venus and on top of Pluto. This is really applying a lot of pressure, really applying a lot of rules and a very disciplined routine. Yeah, I doubt it's defaulting on our debt, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was some type of cryptocurrency thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it was some type of end of fiat money somehow. Or it's going to be a pretty radical change in how America deals with its money. And I just don't think the dollar is going to lose its value. I just don't. It's going to go up and down, but I don't see it because there's just no other competition at this moment. I don't think China, so for those that are curious, the CCP has a birth chart that is debated somewhere between 1 degree Aquarius rising and 26 degrees Capricorn rising. If you kind of look at all the transits that have been going on, I kind of think it's a Capricorn rising. But so I also don't think they're going to be doing all too well. But, I would almost assume this would be when you hear, okay, hey, we're either I think interest rates will already be raised. And so I think things will really go down. But I think this is where we kind of go, okay, Now that we're done with, the dollar kind of going up and down, I think this is when we'll start to not necessarily hit a recovery mode, but this is when we're out of the whole, like, I think merchandise will be back in stock. Like Venus is going to be on top of Mars. Well, this is my other problem too, is so, like, for example, when these car manufacturers, if you drive by a car lot in America, there's no cars on the lots, which, we don't need cars. We should get away from cars. But anyway, you're going to see manufacturers try to replace their inventory at bigger rates, and they're going to try to fill in those gaps. However, what people don't, I think what you're going to see is a lot of people are getting there because the dollar is going to go crazy, because people are going to have these products already. I think Venus and Mars going through Capricorn, I think there's going to be this overproduction of things. Like Mars conjoining Pluto and Venus is like, hey, just because, like, you need a break sometimes. And I think this is kind of taking things to this extreme, but I also think this might be an over inventory. And let's say there's too many houses on the market, for example, that's going to lower the value of a house. If there's too many cars on the market and no one's, it's simple economics when it comes to supply and demand. And right now there's a high demand, no supply. I think here by March there's going to be a low demand and a high supply, where again, I think deflation's coming. And if it does come, it's going to be very, like, I keep hearing this term through in economics of like deflationary death spiral. And that seems much more of the case with Pluto. It doesn't seem like the end of the world, but this Pluto return, I can't imagine it being something small, right? I don't think it's going to be us defaulting on our debt. We're already off the gold standard. I don't know how if we got off of fiat money and went to crypto, I have no idea how any of that works. So I had no, like, again, like, this is just one of those things where it's about the timing, in my opinion. And so what I can sit here and tell you guys exactly is at the end of December, something's like, there's going to be kind of this bottom that we hit that stirs up all of these crises. January will be nothing but fluctuation and change. And that's because we're probably going to see interest rates rise. And once interest rates rise, I have no idea what's next after that. No idea what can be next after that. The other reason I also kind of, I think as Mars conjoins Pluto and Venus during America's Pluto return can definitely be, I don't think it's I don't know. It's just, it's hard to tell with everything that's going on. I just don't know enough about economics, but I could sit here and tell you, I think Venus stationing on Pluto is going to be this whole, like, all right, like, inflation's kind of going crazy. We need to do something about it. And from January to March, we'll be doing something about it now. That's going on in the background. I still got other predictions for you guys. We're not even done yet. Next one. Supreme Court. So here's another thing. Everything that I'm about to say does not reflect my beliefs or opinions on these matters, but I don't think we're going to have here's the thing. Venus, the last time Venus retrograded, we had some of the biggest riots, and protests, whatever you want to call them. I don't care anymore. We had some of the biggest ones, right? That was when George Floyd was murdered, right? We had all those protests. I'm trying to think of the Venus retrograde in Scorpio. In America, we have so many protests and riots, I don't even know, but I wouldn't be surprised if Venus stationing on top of Pluto brought it more in the Supreme Court, though, because now in 2014, what's interesting about 2014, the last time I was reading about this, and this is something else that we're going to talk about, is the Ukraine. So there was a bunch of gay rights protests going on in the Ukraine and in Russia, and I just wouldn't be surprised if that came up again. Venus does technically will rule women. And I didn't do enough research on this video to do the, oh gosh, now I can't remember the Supreme Court case. Women's right to abortion, Roe versus Wade. Couldn't remember it. I don't remember when Roe versus Wade happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court rules against that in any way. And that would be, and that, would stir up a lot of riots. But I also wouldn't be surprised. Well, like, what I'm more curious about with a lot of the stuff that the Supreme Court's handling is I don't necessarily think it's going to be one way or the other. Like, they just overturn Roe versus Wade just for shits and gigs. Like, I think it's going to be like both sides will be upset because I don't think both sides will feel like they've won. I mean, it's the same thing, with this right now. This is, of course, before I know what the verdict is with the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So if you're listening to this future, I don't know what happened. But either way, if he's found guilty or innocent, it's no one wins really. Everyone's really a loser in those type of situations. And so I just kind of look at Venus stationing on Pluto. The Roe versus Wade thing is going in there. The other thing is, so what's interesting about the Supreme Court decisions too that I was just thinking about is, so I don't know where we're at with Obamacare, but did you know that Obamacare first went into law on January 1st of 2014? And Venus rules the sixth house of health in America's Sibley chart. So I'm just kind of thinking, like, I wonder, and I know, we'll see, Obamacare, it's so confusing. I'm also like, right now, I'm like in the middle of trying to get health insurance, and this country's health insurance program is so insane. It's so stupid. But anyway, Obamacare was implemented January 1st, 2014. It went into effect. It went into law. Venus is going to, that was the last Venus retrograde in Capricorn. I wouldn't be surprised if this brought up healthcare stuff. I don't know what's going on in the Supreme Court right now when it comes to healthcare or Obamacare, if that's even a thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came back up. So the other one that I wanted to talk about was actually the Russia-Ukraine. So in 2014, I know I'm kind of jumping around everywhere here, and we're going to come back to a few things. But in 2014, that was also when the Ukrainian, was it the Civil War or the Revolution? Oh, I can't believe I can't remember this stuff now. I had all this stuff in my head a second ago, and I don't have it written down well enough. But anyway, in 2014, there was a, let's see if I could find it. Yeah, the Ukrainian Revolution. That's what it was. Which that was a whole thing with Russia. And I don't know if you know right now, but Russia's got a bunch of things on the border right now of Ukraine. And so my prediction is I wouldn't be surprised if Russia and Ukraine got into some type of conflict during this January, February, March, because there was just so much going on in Ukraine at that time too. That's another one of my predictions. Not only did that happen last time, but I just read this article about how Russia's already got like tanks and a bunch of things on the border of the Ukraine. The other thing that happened, so this is the other thing that happened in 2014. It was called the North American Cold Wave. And I talked about this on my Patreon, and someone said that they remembered this, but there was a big cold front in 2014. It was one of the coldest winters on record. Wouldn't be surprised if this was a cold one. Now, if you want to do some old school astrology and you want to do some weather stuff, Venus is going to be in Capricorn, Mars is going to be in Capricorn, Mercury and Saturn are going to be in Aquarius, Jupiter's going to be in Pisces. Jupiter is very wet and moist, Saturn's very dry and cold, and Capricorn is very dry and cold. I think this is going to be a very dry, or I should say a very cold and a very wet winter. I think it's going to be wet simply because Jupiter's in Pisces. And this was kind of more of a wetter summer, especially like here in the Las Vegas. It was super funny reading about just all of it seemed as if all of the water moisture that the West Coast was supposed to get like pretty much came to the desert, because like in Arizona, Vegas, it was like one of the wettest summers ever. Like I've lived in Vegas for a few years on and off, and typically it rains once in the summer and every day in July and June. Well, it was only July. I think it was every day it rained every day in July here in Vegas, which is like not normal. That's not normal at all. But anyway, Jupiter was in Pisces. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a really, really wet winter. I also say that simply because the Saturn-Uranus square, like if there's going to be more colder temperatures, which, with climate change, what's really frustrating when people talk about climate change, they only think in terms of things get hot, and that's not how climate works. There's also extreme colds too. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this was an extremely cold year and maybe there was a lot of floods that required a lot more energy. And a lot more energy production, which again would shut down the grid. That's the whole reason why there is a Texas, the Texas blackout was because it was too much pressure on the grid because it got too cold because of a weather extreme. So anyway, the last time there was a cold front that we had in 2014, and it was a really, really cold winter. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was also a very cold and wet winter on record. Yeah, what was the other thing? Yeah, Venus station direct and a bunch of stocks slumped. There was a bunch of gay rights protests going on in Ukraine, and even here, just a lot of shit was kind of going on those last ones. What's the other one I wanted to? The other prediction. So the only other prediction I want to make was the surveillance state, and this one's kind of super random, but the surveillance state. So the Patriot Act was actually enacted in 2005 and 2006. During the last Venus retrograde in this area. And I had this written. I talk about this on the one that I do my Patreon, but pretty much yeah, here it is. Oh yeah, there was. Oh wait, no, that's something I'm not going to talk about. But the United States Senate passed a 6-month extension to the U.S. Patriot Act late Wednesday night by voice vote. This clears way for final vote in the House. Oh, this was a dead link. I forgot to do that. Anyway, yeah, I think oh gosh, I have so many more notes here than I thought I did. I know if you're listening to this, you're probably annoyed of me, but yeah, I would say, oh God, where to go? Says that the decision to invade Iraq in 2003 was the result of faulty intelligence and accepts responsibility for that decision. Hold on, I have so many things about the Patriot Act. Anyway, pretty much all you need to know was during that time in 2005, 2006, the Patriot Act got enacted as well. Because of the Patriot Act, the war crimes held that were committed by George H.W. Bush at Guantanamo Bay came to light. And I bring that up because this is such a big deal right now. So the Patriot Act got enacted, right? And then 2005, 2006, George Bush's war crimes or crimes against humanity were pretty much, brought to, and what was going on in Guantanamo Bay got brought up. Now, the last time Venus retrograded in Capricorn in 2014, this was when, because of the Patriot Act, the Julian Assange stuff and the Edward Snowden stuff got leaked during December of 2013, 2014. So, well, and it's also interesting too. There was a Mercury retrograde in Aquarius as well back in 2005, 2006. And the Kazemi, there was also this launch that like Google had a lot of their data breached. There was it was like security stuff, like a lot of data breaches and a lot of things kind of getting exposed that people didn't know about. Kind of think the same thing's going to go on here. I mean, Guantanamo Bay still isn't shut down. And I think Joe Biden said something about like them sending like Haitians to Guantanamo Bay because that's a fucking good, because that's a, great place for them. The other thing is though, I just wouldn't be surprised if there was some type of Patriot Act thing that came up where it was like, due to national security, they're just going to get like the NSA thing. That's the other thing with this Edward Snowden stuff was, and the Julian Assange stuff. All that was the NSA. So Edward Snowden found out that, the NSA was spying on us, and that all got leaked during that last Venus retrograde. And so I just think, is it all that surprising to say that the American government's probably spying on us more in a different way that we kind of don't know about? And maybe they're doing some other shady things behind our backs that maybe we don't know about. History repeats itself in history time and time again, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, would say, yes, the America is full of corruption and will definitely spy on you regardless of their rights or their ability to do it. So is it that big of a prediction to say that maybe this winter we find out maybe how the American government's still spying on us? I don't think it's all that crazy, but we also just heard about the IRS tracking bank statements now or something like that. The other thing would be, I also just wouldn't be surprised if we just found out more about, again, like we found out about George Bush in the Guantanamo Bay thing. We found out about Obama and the NSA thing and tracking Edward Snowden. What's next? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. There's a few people though I want to bring up though as I kind of close this out, because I know this wasn't supposed to be a big video. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and be like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen and this is exactly how it's going to go down. My thing is like, let's make some predictions of what this Venus retrograde is going to be and let's go over the dates of it. But there's a few key people I also want to talk about that I think are going to come up. I only am going to bring this guy up because I totally forgot. I wrote this down. Drake Bell. So the last two Venus retrogrades, Drake Bell got in a fuck ton of trouble, which of course really isn't all that out of him because he's not really the best person. But where is he? Yeah, Drake Bell was injured in a car accident that Venus, the last Venus retrograde, and Drake and Josh actually was postponed. And then I had something about him that happened in 2014, but I forgot what that was. Another person that's going to get brought up that I kind of think, and this is a total like news thing too. What's her face? Ghislaine? I don't know what her name is. Ghislaine Maxwell. She has Venus retrograde at 25 degrees Capricorn in the 8th house. She's either going to prison or she's going to wake up dead over this Venus retrograde. Someone else, and I talked about both of these people actually on Allegedly Astrology. I don't know if you guys know about that podcast. Fantastic girls. Absolutely love their podcast. They're super fun to talk to. They have a really good show. You should check them out. Allegedly Astrology, again, if you haven't heard of them. And I talked to them about what's his face? Alex Jones. Alex Jones also has a Venus retrograde at 20. And I know a lot of you probably don't even care about him. But I just wouldn't be surprised. Again, like just like Maxwell has 25 degrees retrograde Capricorn. Alex Jones has 25 degrees retrograde Capricorn, or Venus retrograde. I think something's going to happen to both of them. I think it'll be a health thing with Alex Jones. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if it was a health thing, but I also think, Ghislaine literally has her Venus in the 8th house, so I don't think she's going to be making it too much longer. The other person, I believe it was Jake Paul. And I know half of you listening are probably like, please don't talk anything about Jake Paul, but actually I need to confirm it is Jake Paul. So Jake Paul started his YouTube account back in 2014 during this last Venus retrograde. And I don't know if you know his chart. He has everything in Capricorn in the 9th house on the midheaven, which, I mean, we can go into him being like a YouTuber and all that stuff. There's going to be a huge publicity thing with Jake Paul, which again, is that big of a prediction? No, but I just wouldn't be like, I would really say that Jake Paul is going to come up in the news, whether that's a big career shift or him stopping something. That's what I would mostly think of, or him maybe even getting in really big trouble. Wouldn't be surprised about that. God, who else? There was someone else I think I thought I had in my head that I wanted to talk about who had Venus retrograde. I think that's about it. But anyway, essentially the big things that I just wanted to go over was I think we're going to have, again, the Iran nuclear deal is going to come up. America, we're going to raise interest rates, and so my predictions. So let me close this out with my final predictions. Jerry's final thoughts. Cameron's final predictions. Iran's going to do something with nuclear energy or nuclear bombs, and we're going to freak out over it. At what point that is, I don't know, but it's going to be between January and March, and there's going to be this whole, oh my God, Iran nuclear deal. You're going to hear about that 10,000 times. I think you're going to see inflation go crazy, but then I think we're going to raise interest rates, and I think you're going to see deflation go crazy as well. You'll probably see, again, the housing market's going to collapse January through March. Like, everyone's waiting for the housing market to collapse. Everyone's just wanting to know when. It's going to be January. Well, technically December, but January, February, March, all of that gets wrapped up. I think Russia and Ukraine are going to get into some type of beef. I mean, not into some type of beef. They already have beef. There's going to be some type of argument or conflict that happens there. I think whatever the Supreme Court decides, whatever it decides, there's going to be massive protests. I don't think anyone's going to be really happy after that. I think the surveillance state and the national security state, there's going to be probably some shitty information that we find about that. Unfortunately, I think it's also going to be a cold and a wet winter. And I think that there's going to be a lot of infrastructure destabilization, as if, again, that's not that crazy of a prediction, but I think January 14th, mark my words, January 14th, that Mercury retrograde, it's going to be something stupid. It's going to be something so minuscule, but it's going to it's going to be mostly electricity, energy in some sort. And I think it's just going to be a grid, probably a grid failure. But again, that's just it's not that that's a crazy prediction. I think where I'm more focused on predicting is the day, and that's January 14th. January 14th, there's no way something doesn't come up. Russia-Ukraine conflict. And then the other thing is Obamacare. I have no idea what's going on with Obamacare. I'm so young. I don't know anything about health insurance in this godforsaken country. So I got to educate myself more on it. But anyway, I thought it was really interesting that Obamacare got implemented the last time. And here we are back again. And there is Obamacare, but see, it's stupid. I don't even know how it works. But anyway, those are kind of my predictions for this Venus retrograde. Again, there's so many of these topics that I just got to briefly go into that I don't know enough about, that I really want to know what you guys think. And again, maybe you know more about this stuff than I do. And if you know what was going on between December of 2005, January, February, March of 2006, and you thought of something, or there was an article, if there was something that you might think that might happen again, let me know. Same thing with December of 2013, January, February, March of 2014. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen. Let me know what you think of my predictions. I think I'm going to start making a post-event horoscope, whether that is a post-weekly horoscope and we go over the transits of the last week, a post-monthly horoscope where we just go over the last transits of the month, or a post-Venus retrograde horoscope where I pretty much say, hey, I made all these predictions. Let's go over what I was right about, what I was wrong about. I want to do something like that. And it might be with this Venus retrograde. We will go over the predictions again, though. We're going to come back to this. So, when, I don't know, it'll be in a couple months once Venus is out of shadow. That will be, of course, later or in the March, April of 2022. So just kind of, keep that in the back of your head, but we will come back to this. So let me know what you guys think is going to happen, and we'll come back to it eventually. With that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of The Delineation. It has been a pleasure speaking again, and I'm very excited to be back. So anyway, with that being said, I'll leave you off with that, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.